This is Channel 9's The Great Debate.
Well, good evening again and welcome to a very special occasion here on Channel 9. It's an event of tremendous interest, of course, to all Territorians. The great debate between, on my right, the Chief Minister Paul Henderson. Good evening to you, Paul.
Evening, Jono.
And very good evening to you as well, Opposition Leader Terry Mills. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Terrific. Now, gentlemen, as you would be acutely aware, there are more than 3 days of campaigning now before the people decide which party will rule here for the next 4 years. Now, as in all debates, we do have some rules tonight. I'm going to give... You've got 3 minutes each for an opening address, and I'll give you 30-second and 10-second prompts as we move through that. Then I've got some questions of my own, followed by a segment where we're going to seek answers to a selection of questions on behalf of you, our 9 News Darwin viewers. You've been sending them into our Facebook page, and we've certainly taken them on board. Then we've allowed 1 minute for final comments. Now, a short time ago, we tossed a coin to decide the order. Take a look. This is the all-important coin toss to decide who's going to have the opening address here of the great debate. To balance things out, whoever does speak first is going to speak last at the end of the show. Okay, gents, rather than flicking the coin, having it roll across the studio floor, I'll attempt to catch it, flick it onto the other hand if that's okay.
No worries.
Chief Minister, you're the incumbent, so I'll let you call heads or tails.
I'll call heads. Tails.
Tails it is. Terry Mills, would you like to go first in the opening address or second?
I'll go second.
So there you have it. It's over to Mr. Paul Henderson for the opening address. 3 minutes, Chief Minister.
Thank you, Jono. The Northern Territory is the greatest place to live in the world, and certainly our economy is the envy of the nation. Since the global financial crisis, we've created over 13,000 new jobs in this economy, and of course with Impex making a final investment decision to bring their project to Darwin, this has unleashed a wave of confidence right across our economy, to the point of the fact that even Myer has decided to invest here in Darwin because of the strength of our economy. But it's not just about that, it's about how this economy is going to benefit mums and dads across the Territory, and there's nothing more important than health and education. During this campaign, I've made a commitment to build a brand new children's wing at Royal Darwin Hospital. Our kids deserve the very best of care when they're sick, and along with the children's wing, we're going to have a Starlight Express room and also a Royal Darwin Hospital Children's Foundation to allow business to partner with the hospital to support those kids with new equipment. And of course, my opponent Terry Mills says that children's wing would not go ahead under him. In terms of education, we're saying that we are going to see every single school in the Northern Territory have an upgrade over the next 4 years, and also introduce a new Year 9 program for kids in terms of life skills. Of course, my opponent Terry Mills has not made $1 single extra of spending commitments in terms of education. For most people, buying a new home is one of the greatest things that they do in life. And since the global financial crisis, the banks froze in terms of lending money for people for new homes. That's why we introduced our My New Home scheme. No deposit home loan schemes, and over 1,000 people have beaten down the doors to TIO wanting access to this scheme. Terry Mills, my opponent, says that he'd scrap it, leaving people broken-hearted that they're not going to be able to get into their new home. And of course, during this campaign, Terry Mills has to advise all of our public servants out there. How many thousand public servants is he going to cut their jobs to fund the $2 billion worth of spending commitments he's made in this campaign? It's a key answer that Terry Mills needs to give our public servants. How many thousands of jobs are going to be cut? What services are going to be cut to pay for his election commitments during the campaign? And of course, under my leadership, strong, stable leadership for the Territory, a big, bold, bright vision for the future of the Northern Territory. And we know that the CLP are divided and that Dave Tollner is after Terry Mills' job. And in terms of the election on Saturday, it'll be about who do you trust to lead the Northern Territory. My team, strong, stable, with a big, bold vision for the Northern Territory, united behind my leadership, or Terry Mills and Dave Tollner. And everybody knows that Dave Tollner is after Terry Mills' job.
Okay, thank you very much, Paul Henderson. Terry Mills, your right of reply. You have 3 minutes.
Well, thank you, Jono. This is a very big choice that Territorians face on August the 25th. A choice to continue on with another 4 years of Labor, which makes it 15 years of Labor. And no matter how the Chief Minister tries to spin it, we have some serious challenges that need to be properly dealt with. Yeah, granted, we've got opportunity, we've got growth, but it's how you plan and it's how you manage that growth. That's why today I have entered into a contract with Territorians, so I'll be fully accountable. You will know exactly what I stand for and what the Country Liberals will do. If we don't deliver in the next 4 years, then you can vote us out. We've made it very clear. One contract with Territorians, and it'll be in the hands of Territorians, and you can hold us to account. That contains 5 very clear and very important pledges. We will cut the waste. We've got massive debt in the Northern Territory under Labor, and we have to cut that waste so that we can drive all those dollars to the front line and make sure that Territorians are well served by the public service. And the Chief Minister can try and frighten people by saying that we've got plans to cut the public service. Well, no public servant has anything to be concerned about. In fact, we're talking about strengthening and focusing the public service. And it's curious that the only sacking of a public servant has occurred during the campaign, and it's the Chief Minister's Deputy Chief of Staff. So no wonder they're a bit frightened. And they're the only mob that are talking about cuts to the public service. And rather than cuts, we're planning to grow the economy and expand it, not just hang off one single project. Don't put all your eggs in the INPEX basket. And more importantly, in terms of making sure that young people can stay here, you don't have uncosted and untested schemes that might increase the risk for young Territorians. What you need to do is to plan properly, put our planning commission in place to make sure that there are places in the market for young people and particularly key workers to live. That's why I have committed $15 million to provide that space in the marketplace. The Chief Minister only talks about increasing the demand. We will increase the supply of housing, then we can see real progress. And ultimately, we will be accountable to you. And we're not going to go into political deals to try and save our political hide, as we've seen under Labor. When you get into positions like that, then you deceive and you mislead and you duck and you dive. You have contracts with the people around you so you can stay in power. We'll have one contract, and that is with Territorians.
30 seconds.
Territorians, it is time to make a big decision. The future is actually in your hands. It's your call. It's time to raise standards in our schools, to raise the standards of behaviour on the streets, raise the standards of consequence around those who misbehave, deal with alcohol properly. And I don't want to go for another 4 years and talk about the challenges that we face. We must be a part of that solution. The choice is yours. Better future.
Okay, Terry Mills, Paul Henderson, thank you very much for your opening addresses. Let's get stuck into some questions. I particularly want to start off with a topic that I think is a recurring theme through this election, and that is the cost of living. There's a number of Territorians really doing it tough here in Darwin and the Northern Territory. Chief Minister, I'll start with you. Labor's been in office now for 11 years here in the Northern Territory. Why is it only now that you're starting to roll out these programs to help Darwin families? And further to that, how have you let it get so bad?
Well, of course, if we're talking about the cost of rents and the cost of housing, we've got more land than we've ever had available for people to buy in the past, and 2,700 units and apartments shovel ready to go. The problem has been not a lack of land, but a lack of finance, and that's why we've introduced our No Home Deposit Scheme to allow people to borrow the deposit to get into their own home. And as I've said, 1,000 people have beaten the doors down to TIO to get access to own their own home. And if Terry Mills gets into office, he's going to scrap that and leave people absolutely crestfallen, not being able to get into their own home.
We'll get into housing a bit later, but it's more than housing, isn't it? It's petrol, it's everything. It's food and fruit and veg at the shops.
Well, certainly, you know, in terms of petrol, Jono, we don't tax petrol, so there's nothing we can do about the cost of petrol. In terms of we have many subsidies. You know, we provide $800 a year to subsidise everybody's electricity bill. We've increased our back to school voucher. We're going to introduce a $200 credit for childcare. We've got free bus travel for pensioners and seniors, and the most generous seniors concessions in the nation. I acknowledge the cost of living is high here in the Northern Territory, and we've got many schemes and subsidies to help with that, the most generous in the country.
Okay, Terry.
I wouldn't mind responding to that. The
Please.
Chief Minister says that these Territorians are going to be crestfallen if we scrap a scheme that's been untested and is risky and it's only going to increase demand, which will result in increased prices. What about the 4,000 crestfallen Territorians that left the Territory because of the cost of living, primarily around the cost of housing? Now, it's well and good to go and blame the banks because it's the banks' problem, or blame the public service. But you were warned in 2007 and said there's no need to release any more land. You resisted. You had a couple of focus groups that then told you you've got a problem.
That's not
Time
true,
to
Terry.
release the land, and you did that in 2008, and you've been playing catch up ever since.
Terry Mills, let's talk about your plans to reduce the cost of living for Darwin families. They seem to be very similar to Labor's plans as well. For instance, the back to school vouchers, it's an identical policy. How can we be so sure that you'll do a better job than what the Chief Minister will in Labor?
The biggest burden that is on families, and particularly families with young kids, planning for the future is wondering where on earth that young Territorian is actually going to live in the Northern Territory. So the first thing is to make sure we increase the supply of housing. Labor's schemes have seen us short by 500 dwellings every single year. So my plan is to make $15 million available to partner with the private sector and build affordable rental properties for those key workers, particularly apprentices. So we actually need them right now. And I want to make sure that 4,000 don't leave in the next 4 years or 2 years or 1 year, but they actually come back to the Territory. Also, we'll resist the carbon tax because Paul Henderson supports the carbon tax. It is an impost on the cost of living in the Northern Territory, on electricity in the Northern Territory, and ultimately transport costs. We're very exposed there, and it's just not on. We will resist it, and because it has to be resisted, because it's not going to help the Territory one iota.
Chief Minister, you've talked about housing and you touched on this in your opening address, the My New Home scheme. Can I ask you though, how does that really help, for instance, first home buyers? The average home in Darwin at the moment, you don't get too much change from $600,000 by the time you throw stamp duty and everything else. How do first home buyers, those people really trying to break into the market, how can they possibly afford repayments? Let's be on a more modest home, let's say $500,000. The average repayments on a $500,000 loan at the moment is $800 a week. How does someone afford that?
Well, Jono, of course, not everybody gets into their first home through a 3-bedroom house on a 800 square metre block. You know, there are units and apartments that are much cheaper than that for people to get into. What we're doing here is breaking into the cycle where the banks froze lending to first home buyers by requiring up to 20% deposit. The no deposit home loan scheme that we will put in place has been embraced by developers, it's been embraced by many, many commentators. There's nobody who's put their hand up to say Terry Mills' scheme is a good idea. And there are going to be and his scheme, Jono, does not get one more Territorian owning their own home, not one. And $15 million, not one person more owning their own home. We've got 1,000 people beating down the doors of TIO who want access to this scheme. Their dreams will be shattered by Terry Mills scrapping the scheme.
You're a bit of overreach there. You've had quite a few economists saying pretty risky scheme, Paul, and exposing people to increased liability, and you're not talking about increasing the supply of housing.
Well, of course the supply of housing will be increased as these 2,700 units that are shovel-ready come out of the ground.
Slogan.
4,500
real
blocks of land.
Proper planning.
We can talk about housing. Gentlemen, we can talk about housing forever.
Shovel-ready. Get ahead of the game.
We've got a lot to get through. Gentlemen,
you will take us backwards. You'll take us backwards and leave 1,000 people there.
Another 15 years of this.
Thanks, Terry. Tell you what, you guys are tough, aren't you? Tough for a first gig. Chief Minister, let's move on. With all the spending and the promises, there is no doubt that it comes at a cost, and the Territory's debt is an issue. Why has the Territory slumped so much deeper into the red under your watch?
Well, we made a deliberate decision to go into deficit after 8 surplus budgets, Jono, to save jobs. To save jobs. First and foremost, for me, the most important thing in anybody's life is to have a job to be able to raise a family. We have taken a responsible decision. Our level of debt to GDP is around 11.5%. Australia's about 9. If you look at Greece, it's about 168. So this is a responsible thing to do. All of the economic commentators have said it's a responsible thing to do. If Terry Mills and his team had had his way, we would have seen thousands of jobs lost in the Northern Territory. We'd have seen hundreds of businesses close their doors. As the Chief Minister, I will always protect jobs first and foremost, and the debt is manageable, the debt is responsible, and certainly Terry Mills' plan to return us to surplus over the first term, he needs to tell us where he's going to find the $2 billion worth of savings and how many thousands of public servants is he going to sack.
I'll interrupt you there because we've got to get through a few questions. Further to that though, there is no doubt that the Northern Territory economy at the moment is in a very strong state. Is there any risk to the voters of the Northern Territory that by voting in a country Liberals government, are we risking that future growth?
Oh no, I think we're protecting ourselves from the risks that we have with the exposure to debt, with not a skerrick of a plan to spend less than we earn.
Well, what's your plan, Terry?
To make sure we live within our means, to
How are
have,
you gonna do
have,
that?
have a commitment. You don't have a commitment. You don't have a plan.
Well, where's
you just
your plan?
No, you have no plan. You've had 10 years to plan for this,
And 8 surplus
But
budgets.
the econ-
8 surplus
but Terry,
budgets.
Terry, the economy is going well. Is it not?
The economy is going very well. I think it's been poorly managed. If you've got a good operation in play, you've got to have then the opportunity to make sure you manage the opportunity that you have. They haven't managed. There's all sorts of waste at the upper levels of government where they're focusing more on themselves than making sure that the dollars that they're responsible for drive services to the front line. I think we've got a government here who's become obsessed with itself, and we have indecision, we have waste of time around decision making, and we're not driving the territory forward. Those dollars should be looking outward. I think it's actually about the future of the Northern Territory and not the future of the Labor Party.
Our
Okay,
economy
what
is
happened-
the envy of the nation, Terry.
What happened?
Of course it is.
What
Gotta
happened?
manage it.
What happened in Queensland? The Liberals came to power, and 20,000 public servants lost their job. Chief Minister has suggested that public servants aren't safe here in Darwin and the Northern Territory. Can you guarantee tonight that every Darwin public servant is safe in their job?
Yes, I can. And the only ones talking about cuts to the public service, they did it in 2008. They came out and made this outlandish claim, watch out, you vote for this bloke, he's going to sack everybody. And at the same time, believe them. Same story again, trying to frighten people. As I said before, the only sacking's been in the Chief Minister's own office during the campaign. We haven't talked about sackings. What we've talked about is making sure we focus the public service on service delivery to the front line, to Territorians, not service to the government, and make sure that we expand the economy. And in expanding the economy and growing, we need a strengthened public service. We want to work with them to drive the territory forward. The public service there is to service the interests of Territorians and not to service the interests of government. That leads to inefficiency.
Paul Henderson, you've been very particular during this campaign to distance yourself from the Labor brand. Julia Gillard hasn't been invited to town. Is it somewhat hypocritical that you've been trumpeting and very happy to accept all the Commonwealth money that's been dished out of late?
Well, look, Jono, this election is being fought on territory issues. Now, every time that Terry Mills talks about Julia Gillard, he's avoiding talking about territory issues. And we've put very clear policies to grow the economy, to develop health and education services in the Northern Territory. Terry Mills hasn't made any additional spending commitments at all in terms of health and education, and he's still got a $2 billion black hole in the promises that he's made, and he needs to come clean.
We want to get to some viewer questions, but before I do that, I've got one more for both of you. Chief Minister, will you commit to 4 years as Chief Minister if you're re-elected on Saturday?
Absolutely, Jono.
And is
Look,
your job safe, or is Dave Tollner...
It is safe. Look, put it this way. I have been in opposition talking about the problems created by Labor for 11 years.
Does Dave Tollner want your job, Terry? That's all I'm asking.
Oh, lots of people may want my job. This is the job that I will take all the way through. 11 years working on this.
That's all I wanted
I've been
to know.
tested and tried,
That's all I
and
wanted
I'm
to know. We've got to
continuing
go
on.
to
I
a
will
break
lead
because
the territory.
we've got lots of questions that have been sent in by our viewers. We'll get to them after this short break. You're watching The Great Debate.